you got your Bibles open to James chapter 5, we're going to look just briefly as an introduction to the lesson from there, and then go to the book of Job. And we'll be spending the majority of our time in the book of Job this morning. As our tradition is here, the second Sunday morning of each month, we typically will set that aside to study what the young people are looking at in their OSH, our spiritual heritage curriculum. And this morning they were looking at the story of Job. And Job is really indeed for us a great example of what it means to be patient. God recorded the events that happened in this man's life, though while the man himself was going through them, he didn't really understand what was going on behind the scenes. We've been privileged to know not only what's going on behind the scenes, but also the end that was intended by the Lord. And James uses it here in these writings that the Holy Spirit gave to him to tell the brethren that they are to be patient and understanding, that there are those who are being mistreated among them, and it may even be from their own brethren that this mistreatment may come. But as these things are taking place, to understand that God still has an expectation, not just of the one who's doing the wrong, but also of the one who is being wrong. That even when we suffer unjustly, there is still something that we have a responsibility to react appropriately regarding, and that is that the Lord is at hand. And so if you're ready for your 3 words this morning, let's see the notebooks this morning. All right. The 3 words are from James chapter 5. And if you look at verse 9, this is from the New King James. Here's your 3 words. Do not grumble. Do not grumble. Yours may have complain or murmur or something very similar to that. But that is the point of today's lesson, is that we're going to come under times in our lives, probably quite frequently, where our faith, just as it was with the faith of Job, is going to fall into and find itself in the line of fire, that Satan's going to attack it. And sometimes it may be from some very unlikely sources, and it may be from very disappointing sources. But no matter where it comes from, we have a responsibility to not grumble. And this morning I want us to identify, so why is it? And how is it that we can conquer and have victory in these moments to where we don't grumble? Okay, so let's go to the book of Job. The book of Job. We studied the book of Job a few years back. And as we're looking through that book, as you might understand, there's a lot of things that are going on within this book. The first few chapters is a dialogue between God and Satan, where Satan comes in amongst the other sons of God, and while he's there, God asks him the question, have you considered my servant Job? And Job is introduced to us as a man who is very wealthy. He has a lot of possessions. He has a large family. But it also says that he is one who is righteous, that he is a blameless man. The understanding of that is that he is a perfect or complete man, that he's not someone who just thinks about righteous things or does righteous things occasionally, but he is someone who actually acts upon the things that he believes, that he's practicing these things. And in God's sight, he is unlike anyone else that he's seen on the earth. And so Satan has said that he's been to and fro on the earth. And so now there's a challenge. Does Job serve God for nothing? Is Job only going to serve you while you continually bribe him to serve you? In other words, Job's loyalty has only been bought by you, God. But if I take away these things from him, he'll curse you to your face. And so that challenge is laid down, and as we know that Job stands in the test of that fire, that his children, his possessions, all these things are taken away from him. But then even after all those things come to him, that's not enough, and Satan comes with another trial. And God asks him, have you seen Job? Flesh for flesh. All that a man will give, he'll give for his flesh. Let me touch his body, and he'll curse you to your face. And we know the outcome of that as well. And indeed, it is a great victory that Job is able to achieve in the midst of those trials. But that's just in the first few chapters. The next several chapters are about Job's friends who come to him, and they're supposed to be comforting him, but instead they begin to hurl all these different accusations at him and accuse him of wrongdoing, and that the reason you're being punished is because you're wicked. And Job, throughout all of this, seems to be very confused and not understanding what's going on. And then at the end of the chapter, at the end of the book, we see that God indeed does respond, but He doesn't give Job an answer. And throughout all these things, we see that Job, in the very end, is blessed by God because of one simple thing. And that one simple thing we'll look at as we go through the lesson. So indeed, Job was indeed tested. Everything that he had was taken from him. Job 1 and verse 1 says this, that he was in the land of Uz, not Oz, that's a different story altogether. His name was Job. That man was blameless and upright and one who feared God and shunned evil. And in verse 8 it says also, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth? One blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. He was one who put away these things from himself. And even though he was a righteous man, doing righteous things and had approval in the sight of God, we also see this, that Satan still was hunting after him. That Satan was still looking to take someone like Job. Just because a person lives a righteous life does not mean he's going to go through the same kinds of things that Job went through. That Job did indeed suffer the loss of everything that he had. Everything that he could rely upon on this earth was removed from him. Everything that seemed to give him joy, to give him comfort, to give him fulfillment in life was taken from him. Many of us have suffered loss. I dare say many of us have not suffered the same kind of loss in the great magnitude that Job did. And it's understandable why such an example will be given to us in the Scriptures, that Job was going to serve God in the midst of these things. But will he? That's the question that's being answered. Will you serve God when everything is taken away? When there is absolutely no benefit from serving God whatsoever, will you still serve God? When there's no apparent benefit. Young people, this is one of the things I want you to think about. Some of you have probably said it, and the reason I know you've probably said it is because pretty much all of us older people have said it. This is one of the reasons why many people will leave the church and forsake the faith. One simple statement. I'm not getting anything out of it. Why should I go to church? Why should I go to worship? Why should I go to Bible class? I'm not getting anything out of it. Well, Job served God when there's no apparent benefit, when he's not getting anything out of it. Why are you here? Why do you serve God? What is the benefit that you look at that you say, this is why I serve God? Now imagine Satan taking that away from you. Here's the point. If Satan can take it away from you, then that is not the real reason you should be serving God. If the only reason I'm serving God is because of the hedge that God has put around me, just like he did Job, then my faith is in the hedge and not in the one who made the hedge. Our faith and our service is devoted to God simply because of who God is, not because of what God gives me. God is deserving of my praise and adoration regardless of the benefits or the suffering that I must go through in order to serve him. That is what serving God is about. It's because he is deserving. I serve God for God's sake, that I want to see God face to face. And brethren, that's something that Satan cannot take away from us. And so if the only reason that we're serving God is because of the hedge, because of the blessings, then we're serving God for the wrong reason. Young people, search your hearts deeply. And if you are looking to serve God only because he's giving you something, you're not serving God, you're serving yourself. And Satan has got an advantage. He's got a foothold, and you must stand against it. It's a battle I know you're going through because all of us have been through that battle. It takes maturity, and it takes understanding, it takes some experience, it takes some lumps along the way, but it's a lesson that you will have to learn. Job helps us learning that lesson. Will we serve God even when there's no benefit that we're getting out of it? What if God is able to allow Satan to take such things from us? We have to ask ourselves. Look in chapter 2 and verse 10. Job 2 and verse 10. This was the thing that his wife complained to him about. When she says in verse 9, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job understood that he was going to suffer the loss of some things, and it may be that God is the one who takes them away. But just as it is that when we enter into this life, we have nothing. When we leave this life, we'll have nothing as well. We also see, though, that Job was one who was falsely accused. that even his friends, the people that you would think would be there to support him and to give him a good understanding of what he's going through and to help him along the way, they criticize him as well and begin to cast aspersions upon him. Go to chapter 22, Job 22. We're going to pick up at verse 4. Verse 4 of Job 22. This is Eliphaz who is speaking to Job. And starting at verse 4 of Job 22, he says, "Is it because of your fear of him that he corrects you and enters into judgment with him? Is not your wickedness great and your iniquity without end? For you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have not given the weary water to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. But the mighty man possessed the land, and the honorable man dwelt in it. You have sent widows away empty, and the strength of the fatherless was crushed. Therefore snares are all around you, and sudden fears trouble you, or darkness so that you cannot see, and abundance of water covers you." In other words, the reason that you are drowning in so much sorrow, the reason you are drowning in so much calamity, the reason that all these things are happening upon you are not just because you are a sinner, but you are suffering so greatly that you must be a horrible and abundantly sinful. He was being falsely accused. God had said he's one who shuns evil. He does what is right. He's a good and righteous man. And his own friends who should have known this about him cast these accusations against him falsely, because this is not who Job is. So are you going to serve God still when even your own family, when even your own friends turn against you? Or is it only going to be when you're benefited from it? Will a man serve God for nothing? Literally nothing. Will a man still serve God? That's the question. Job passes this test, so much so that in Ezekiel 14 and verse 14 it says this, that even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver only themselves by their righteousness, says the Lord. God is talking about the destruction that is rightly due nations because of the wickedness and perpetual and persistent wickedness that is among it. And God says that on a nation that is always doing evil, if I'm going to cast my judgment upon it, there's only three men that would be able to save themselves: Noah, Daniel, and Job. And they wouldn't be able to save anyone else. And you see it with Noah, that he was in a world that was filled with wickedness, but it was only he and his family that got on the ark. Daniel was able to stand in the midst of a nation that wanted him to pray to other gods, and he did not do it, along with his three Hebrew friends. And we also see that Job loses everything. His wife wants him to curse God and die because it'd be better for him to be dead than to see him in the state that he is in, and his own friends. And it seems that now even God himself is against him. And what will he do? How does he conquer? And how does he win in the midst of these certain trials that he's going through? What we learn from Job is that God is deserving of praise simply on the basis of who he is. That God is deserving of adoration even in the midst of difficult days and when all else seems to fall apart around us. So how do we pass this test? Let's go to chapter 27, Job 27, verses 1 through 6. The word we're going to use is one that was found earlier in chapter 2, but this is what it points to. Job 27, and starting at verse 1. This is the one thing in Job's life that could not be touched. Job 27 and starting at verse 1. Moreover, Job continued his discourse and said, "As God lives, who has taken away my justice, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter. As long as my breath is in me, and the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak with wickedness, nor my tongue utter deceit. Far be it from me that I should say, 'You are right.' Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast, and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live." Job tells his friends that you are wrong in the accusations you have cast against me. That even though these things have been taken away, even by God, I will not change this fact. I will serve him to the day I die. I will hold fast to my integrity. His wife said it'd be better for you to be dead than to go through what you're going through. Go ahead and curse God and die, because I'd rather see you dead than going through these types of things. And Job himself, as the friends' backs are turned against him, says, I will not change who I am for anyone. Let Satan do his worst. Let God take everything away from me. My reason for serving God is this: I have decided a long time ago that I will not change. And that is the choice that a lot of brethren have made long ago, that no matter what, even if it means pain in serving God, I'm going to serve God. That's why you see brethren who are here when you know that they are in physical pain, when they're going through hardships and difficulties, when they've had a bad day at work, when the family is in turmoil, they still show up. And the reason they do is because they're serving God regardless, because God is always the answer. It is only when a person loses everything except God that they realize that God is enough. And that's the lesson that we learn from Job. That is the lesson of integrity. Integrity means you do what is right regardless. It is not like the child who is screaming in the grocery store and the parent says that if you will behave, I'll give you a candy bar. It is not that. That child is taught to do what is right because it is right, not because of what they get out of it. We are taught to serve our God because He is God, not because of what we get out of it in fleshly rewards and blessings. It is only when a person loses everything but God that they really learn that lesson. And most of us have never been to that state. But thanks be to God that most of us have never been driven to that state. But this is a decision that you make, not in the midst of the trial, but before the trial ever happens, that I am going to serve my God. When we stood up before an audience of people, no matter how big that or small that audience was, and we said that we believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that I believe that He is God's Son that came to this earth to die for my sins, that He is the one I'm going to follow, that was not a short term or only when it's good and beneficial to me confession. It is one that meant something. It means that no matter what, I can be counted on. That God, you can trust me because I have trusted you. That I will be there no matter what it is. It's the kind of heart that we're supposed to have in the midst of whatever the fight or the struggle is, not just in our own lives, but even when we come to the defense of others. When we contend for the faith, it means that we really are serious about what we have said and that it wasn't just a passing remark. Job said that he was going to hold fast to his integrity. In Matthew 23, verse 3, Jesus criticizes the Pharisees. And he says that whatever they tell you to do, that you should do that because it's said in Moses' seat. But don't do according to their works. Jesus says that they are the kinds of people who will say something but not do it. They will bind heavy burdens upon other people, but will not even lift a finger to try to do it themselves. Instead, James tells us we're supposed to be the kind of people who are doers of the work and not hearers only. As James says, we deceive only ourselves when we're those kinds of people. As 1 Peter 1, verses 6 through 9 tells us about the testing of fire and going through the hardships and the difficulties, that type of purity, that type of sincerity only comes through the midst of the fire. And this is the true reality, is that if our faith is based upon and has integrity behind it, it does not fear the fire. What Job said in Job 13, if you look there in Job 13 and verse 15, it's an amazing statement. Job 13 and verse 15, when he talks about the way in which he knows he's being tested. Job 13 verse 15 says this, that even though he slay me, yet will I trust him. That's a remarkable statement. That Job says that even if God decides Job must die, that I will trust that his judgment was correct, that was right. Do I have that? Do I have that level of faith and trust in my God? It's hard for me to say that. But you see it with others like Paul when he's in the prison and he knows that he's about to be beheaded, and still he knows that God's going to judge him righteously. Could God have saved Paul or the other martyrs of the faith? and yet he allowed them to die. Do we trust God or not? Integrity. It doesn't fear the fire and the testing because it knows what the testing brings about. It brings about sincerity. Look at Job 23 in verse 10. Job 23, verse 10. It says this. Job 23 and verse 10, Job says this about his integrity and his faith. Job 23:10, he says, but God knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. Job knew that he was going to come forth okay. Do we know that same thing? Imagine yourself going through what Job went through. Would we be able to say the same kind of thing? I know I would come through the fire. If I lost all of my worldly goods, would I be able to come through that fire? If I lost my children, would I be able to come through that fire? If my own wife would rather I be dead than to continue to live in the state that I'm in, so much so that she says, curse God and die and end it, would I still come through the fire? If all I can do is sit and scrape at the sores on my flesh and have no comfort, and my own friends say that the reason you're going through this is because you've done some great wickedness against God, would I still be able to come through the fire? That's what we're searching for. That's what it is that we're trying to grow into and to develop within our own selves. It is only when we have lost everything except our God that having God becomes enough. That's what the testing of fire does to us. Also, one of the things we see in the book of Job, too, is that we need to avoid foolish speculations. There's a lot of reasons that people will give for why they think God has allowed or God has done certain things. Why do good things happen to bad people? How can I have patience in the midst of the trials and the struggles that I go through? And people will go upon all sorts of foolish speculations when it comes to these types of questions. Even Job himself, in Job 19, verses 9 through 11, Job engages in a little bit of this himself. When he says in verse 9, speaking of God, he says, God has stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone. My hope he has uprooted like a tree. He has also kindled his wrath against me, and he counts me as one of his enemies. Now we know for certain that those types of things were not true. And yet it's really easy for us when we have all these things happening to feel that way and to begin to express these things. But we know that that was not true. And even at the end of his life, or at the end of this trial, rather, in Job 42, when God finally does answer, and even when he gives the answer, he doesn't give the answer for what's going on behind the scenes and why are you going through this, Job. Instead, when Job hears what God has to say, this is Job's response in Job 42, and starting at verse 2, he says this, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. Here's his answer. I have heard you by the hearing of my ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. Job knew that he was speaking of things that he just did not understand. And just like it is with Job, there's a lot of times we do not know what's going on behind the scenes. Peter was given a glimpse when Jesus told Peter that Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. He knew that that was coming because Jesus told him, but that was a struggle that was going to go on behind the scenes. Ephesians 6 tells us that there are principalities and powers, rulers of the darkness of this age, and heavenly hosts of wickedness. It tells us about all these things that we are doing battle against, and we never know for sure when those have rallied themselves against us. But this is the truth. Your faith is going to be tested. It's going to come into a line of fire, and it's going to be put to the test. And you don't know what you believe until it's been put to the test. Guaranteed. You think you know, but you don't know until it's actually put to the test. But when we have integrity to say, I will not, and that's a statement that you need to say repeatedly. I will not give in. I will not quit. I will not stop. I will always serve the Lord. I will continually praise His name. I am going to love Him to the day I die. Though He slay me, yet will I serve Him. Those kinds of statements are what we need to be making before the trial hits. Because when we're in the midst of the fire, it's too late to make that decision. You have to be prepared and ready. Because if not, we can go through a lot of foolish exercises about why this is happening and how can I get myself out of it. And we look for answers in all the wrong places. Proverbs 1 tells us that we are to pursue wisdom while wisdom is available. While wisdom is out there crying out in the streets and saying, listen to me, you simple ones. Pay attention to my words. Follow what I'm saying. It sounds like an extremely boisterous woman, I'm not going to say nagging, woman who is saying, listen to me, I'm telling you what you need to do. Because it also says that when your calamity comes and you didn't listen, wisdom's not going to be available for you. Wisdom says, I'm going to laugh at you. I'm going to mock you. Because when I was available, when I was nagging you to listen to me, you would not do it. And now where are you? We are doing battle. This analogy of being in the line of fire is meant to be bold. It's meant to be scary. It's meant to be confrontational to our spirits. Job knew what it was like. And God has blessed us with the ability to see a man who was punished for no reason, just so that we can see how strong we should be in what we go through. Thanks be to God that even though we have things like this in the Scriptures, there are two basic truths that we can know. One of them is this: Satan's power is indeed great, but it is limited. When you go back to Job's chapter 1 and 2, notice some of the things that happen. Job 1 and Job 2, those two chapters once again. Verse 13 of Job chapter 1. There was a day when the sons and daughters of Job were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. A messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped you. While he was speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell down from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Satan is very powerful. He's given great authority over a lot of things, and in this instance, you see how great his power is. That not only was Satan able to allow these things and cause these things to happen, but cause them to happen in perfect and strategic timing. That it wasn't just one thing, and then maybe a week or two later, another thing. But while one is speaking, another. While one is speaking, another. While one is speaking, another. You ever notice how that's happened? Where you get up, you burn your hand on the stove, you go into the bedroom and you start getting ready, and something else bad happens there, and then the next thing you know, you stub your toe on something else, then you go to pick something up and it just slips out of your hand. And then when you think, you know what, that ordinarily would not upset you, but when it's one thing right after another, you notice how mad you get over something that's very meaningless? One thing after another. Satan is very powerful. Even in Luke chapter 4, when he's tempting Jesus, he says, all these things have been put under my hand, and I can give them to whoever I wish. He's very strategic. He knows timing. Maybe there's a reason that red light turned red when you needed it to be green. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but we do know this. And more than that, we know this from 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13, that there is no temptation that you ever will face except for what is common to man. And this verse is a lot more about God than it is about us, because it says, because God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But God will, with every temptation, God in every temptation will provide a way of escape that you may take it. Satan is powerful, but he is limited in what he can do. And God will never allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able to withstand. Be careful of the phrase, I can't take it anymore. Be careful of that. You have no idea how powerful God knows you are if you will trust in him. That's the point. Look what Job was able to make it through. I can't imagine that. And yet he did. Because he had this philosophy. Though he slay me, yet will I serve him. Though he test me by fire, I will make it through. Job knew that, and Job trusted in his God. We also know this truth, that God is merciful and that he is indeed compassionate. Imagine what Job went through, but also that understand that with as much as Job went through, God was able to restore not just the physical blessings that he had, but also joy. You may be going through a dark time. I know there are those who have suffered loss. I know those that are going through trials in life, difficulties that seem unimaginable. God is able to restore joy and comfort no matter what you're going through now. In Job 42, verses 10 through 17, Job 42 is starting at verse 10. And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord God gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then all his brothers and his sisters and all those who had been his acquaintances before came to him and ate food with him in his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon him. Each one gave him a piece of silver and each a ring of gold. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, for he had, and then it goes through the great multitudes of things that he had. And also in verse 13, his 7 sons and 3 more daughters. He called the name of the first, and then it goes through the name of all the children that were there. And after this, in verse 16, and after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations. So Job died old and full of days. Whatever it is that we're going through, and as much as Job had went through, God was able to give him much more and to restore joy in his life. God can do the same for you if that's where you're at. If you're going through hardships, if you're going through difficulties, God is able to make all things well. It may be that the dross in your life, the things you've been trusting in, need to vanish away. They need to be burned away. And that may be very well why you're going through trials. We don't know. But we do know that Satan's powerful and limited, and God is merciful, and he is compassionate. So the question we'll leave with you this morning is this, will your faith stand when it's in the line of fire? I pray to God that it will. I know many of you, brethren, and I know for sure that your faith will, because it has in the past and will in the future. Let's encourage one another, no matter what we're going through, to never give up the fight. If you're subject to the invitation this morning, if you need to be baptized, if you need to repent, if there's something we can do of a spiritual nature to help you, let it be known as together we stand and sing this song.